Hello everyone, this is Beth Wadham from the Association for Contemplative Mind in Higher Education, and welcome to our February webinar, Sentipensante Pedagogy and Contemplative Practice. So we're delighted to be here today with our presenters. Laura Rendón is Professor of Leadership and Educational Policy Studies, and Vijay Kanagala is a Postdoctoral Associate. Laura earned a PhD in Higher Education Administration from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, and holds a Master's in Counseling and Guidance and Psychology from Texas A&M University, Kingsville. She has a BA in English and Journalism from the University of Houston and an Associate of Arts degree from San Antonio College. She began her higher education at Laredo Community College. Laura Rendón is the author of Sentipensante, or Sensing Thinking Pedagogy, Educating for Wholeness, Social Justice, and Liberation. She is also co-editor of Transforming the First Year of College for Students of Color, Educating a New Majority, and Racial and Ethnic Diversity in Higher Education. That's Association for Higher Education reader. Her scholarship on access and student success has been featured in the Chronicle of Higher Education and the PBS documentary The College Track. Laura has received numerous awards, including the Association for the Study of Higher Education Distinguished Service and the National Association of Student Affairs Administrators Latino Knowledge Community Outstanding Faculty Award. She has also been inducted into the Iowa Academy of Education. Vijay Kanagala is a postdoctoral research fellow at the Center for Research and Policy in Education and a lecturer in the Department of Educational Leadership and Policy Studies at the University of Texas, San Antonio. Vijay earned his PhD in Educational Leadership with a higher education emphasis from Iowa State University in 2011. He has master's degrees in Education, Student Affairs, and Business Administration, also from Iowa State University. He received his Bachelor of Science in Microbiology from the University of Madras, Chennai, India, and attended Kuban State Agrarian University, Krasnodar, Russia. Vijay was introduced to contemplative practices in middle school and has continued to incorporate these practices in his life. In addition to understanding the role of spirituality and teaching for wholeness in the academy, Vijay's research interests include persistence, transition, and campus life experiences for students of color, with a special emphasis on South Asian American and international college students. His dissertation, Neither Here Nor There, explores the experience of immigration, integration, and consciousness development among Generation 1.5 Asian Indian American college students. Thank you so much, Laura and Vijay, for offering this webinar to our network, and now I'll hand over the presentation to you.
Thank you so much, Beth and Carrie. Buenas tardes, everyone. It's good to be with everyone this afternoon, and I hope everyone can see our slides. And if not, we can type that in, and we'll see what's going on. We thought that we would start with an opening of our circle here, circle of individuals who are interested in contemplative engagement in colleges and universities. And as we thought about what to do at the beginning, it seems that we need to come back to just the very essence of our lives and how busy we are and how stressed we are. I know this week was really stressful for me as last week. I would invite us to just sit comfortably and just take a deep breath, and let's just enjoy just a moment of silence. Thank you. We want to begin by, first of all, welcoming you. I was looking over the list of individuals who signed up. I see some people I know. I want to say a special hello to faculty at Naropa University, where I'm privileged to serve as a member of the Board of Trustees, and then all of you from 2- and 4-year institutions that are joining us this afternoon.
And hello everybody, again this is Vijay. Welcome to all of you.
Let's begin by just saying a little bit about what got us into this work. You know, from my part, I think I can trace this more directly back to maybe the 1990s, although I could probably go beyond, you know, before that. But in the 1990s is when I was sort of in the middle of my academic career and feeling extremely stressed and anxious and just wondering if there was something that was wrong, you know, that, you know, is there a better way to behave in higher ed? Is there a better way of approaching teaching and learning? Is there a better way for me to be a model, a good model to my graduate students? And along, you know, that time, around that time, I was struck by how a couple of my dearest friends passed away in their 40s, and one of them was 50, and that just got me to thinking that perhaps I needed to reflect more deeply about my life and how I wanted to live it. And around that time, I also received an invitation from the Fetzer Institute in Kalamazoo, Michigan. For those of you who've never heard of Fetzer, you can go to their website, fetzer.org. And the invitation was to submit a proposal for a fellowship that would essentially bring me into community with 15, 16 other people who were pretty much in the same space. But we all were engaged in different areas of work, from education to medicine to communications. And I had the privilege of being awarded one of these fellowships and going to Fetzer and engaging as a community of learners to think about our lives and to reflect on what we could do to make our professions more humanistic, more compassionate, more loving, more reflective. And that is when I decided to engage in an inquiry about what it would take to bring issues of wholeness, authenticity, and spirituality into higher education. And so my book, Sentipensante, Pedagogy, is essentially one of the fruits of that journey, as I call it, that journey that I took to you know, step aside from the craziness of my life and essentially become a more contemplative educator. Vijay?
And with myself, the way I enter this work is, as Beth was talking about my all the degrees that I hold, in some way that is an indication of how I struggled through education to find my place in finding a niche for myself in trying to understand what is it that I want to do in life. You know, the traditional way of, you know, in my culture, and being a first generation, a 1.5 generation immigrant, I was expected to go to med school, in which is what I was going to go to do. But that wasn't what I felt like doing. That was not my calling, so I decided not to do that. But as I progressed and went through the whole process of education, there was something lacking for myself. I didn't feel the calling. And so, but at the same time, I was introduced to contemplative education as a middle school child. And that has been part of my life. But in 2005, when I enrolled as a doctoral student at Iowa State, I had the blessing of meeting Dr. Rendón. And we didn't mention this, but she is actually my doctoral dissertation advisor. In, you know, a lot of the engagement that that I have had with contemplative education in my adult life comes with interactions with her. And so she wrote this book at Iowa State, although she thought about it before, but it was part of that whole process. So I was brought into that framework at Iowa State.
But as we talk about our lives, and I talked a little bit about my journey, one of the things that I've realized is that we need a new vision of education, a new vision of pedagogy, a new vision of how we work with students. And so I read a lot to really come up with a model of Sentipensante pedagogy in and outside of education. And one of the books that really transformed the way that I thought about life is Don Miguel Ruiz's The Four Agreements, Los Cuatro Acuerdos. And he had a statement there that when I first read it, I wasn't quite sure what he meant. If we can see it as our agreements which rule our life, and we don't like the dream of life, we need to change the agreements. So he's speaking on a spiritual level, but when you see that statement, it's really simple but powerful articulation of the whole notion that if we can see that there are rules about our life and we don't like those rules and those guidelines that somebody else created, we just need to come up with a new set of rules. And so in his view, the essential for agreements to lead our lives is say what you mean. That's really being authentic. Don't take anything personally. And as you know, that's very hard to do. Also, don't make assumptions, very hard to do, and always do your best. So essentially, he's got a new book where he adds a fifth agreement to be skeptical and listen with your heart. So I thought about that model of thinking, and I thought about the agreements, the belief systems that are entrenched in higher education that need examination. And some of those need to be changed. I mean, some of those are really bad, others are, half good, half bad. But let's talk about the belief system about diversity, because that is an area that's near and dear to my heart. There is an agreement in higher education. Again, these agreements are not written down anywhere necessarily, but they're very powerful. As you know, when we bring up the word diversity in a committee, it's almost like people get tense. It takes a brave soul to bring that up, and that's because that agreement is so entrenched, and that is that diversity requires only minor changes to the institution. Well, what if we were to come up with a new agreement that said that diversity is not about making minor changes, it's about making major structural changes throughout the institution, to pay attention to faculty and staff hires, to how we recruit students, to how we select the curriculum, how we make our campus climate warm and inviting and inclusive. How do we work with planning and accountability to take diversity into account? And how do we collect data to show how well we are doing, what I call the scholarship of diversity? There's another agreement that is also very entrenched, and that's the agreement to focus on outer work and to avoid self-examination. And that's, again, the whole stress and, day-to-day life where, we're so caught up in our work lifestyle that we just come home, we're exhausted, and there's no time to reflect. There's no time to really think about what it is that we're doing and how much of an impact we have, and what is this doing to us on a personal level. I often tell people that we go around and we always ask people, how are you? And how often do we get back, oh, I feel so relaxed today. I had everything, I all the time to do everything that I wanted to do. But usually what we get is, oh, I'm so tired. There's just not enough hours in the day. I'm exhausted. And so, my friends, that's hurting us. I mean, that's not the natural rhythm of life. And not only that, but if we don't take time to be still and to get rest and to really come to terms with the with the impact that we're having on others and on ourselves, then we really don't understand everything about what we do. And so this daily practice of stillness and reflection and rest are, I think, very, very important. And so I would like to bring those practices back so that being reflective and resting and replenishment are signs of a sage leader, or signs of someone who gets it, not signs of someone who's lazy. So we need to change the agreement that taking time for introspection is unnecessary or too much work. And that's especially important if we're working with issues of diversity, because we have to reflect on, to what extent do I carry the oppressive within me? If I don't say anything about what I see is wrong, how am I going along with all of that? And to what extent is focusing on work, work, work a way to disconnect us from troubling personal issues that also need attention? And so we need a new agreement here, the agreement that self-reflexivity, rest, and replenishment are as important as investing time and energy in action to transform the institution. Let me move now to the belief system about teaching and learning. I came across this quote from Derek Bach, the former president at Harvard, and he says, there used to be a big debate that we needed to study Western cultures in order to understand our past. But I'm convinced that we must start to study non-Western cultures in order to understand our future. And that gets us to this whole arena of multiculturalism. And we have some entrenched views about this. One of them is the almost exclusive validation of Western structures of knowledge and course offerings that preserve the superiority of Western civilization and the dominance of faculty and administrators who subscribe to monocultural paradigms. So we need to change the agreement that Western ways of knowing should be privileged always above all other forms of knowledge. I do believe that Western perspectives have value, and I don't want to totally exclude some of the good things that we have. But we have other worldviews that can be entertained. We have other ways of knowing that are also important, particularly indigenous knowledge. And what agreement would speak to the notion of embracing traditional mainstream perspectives as well as knowledge generated by diverse people? A new agreement might be the agreement of multiculturalism and respect for diverse cultures. There's the agreement to privilege intellectual rational knowing, and that's the privileging of cerebral abilities such as verbal, scientific, and mathematical ability. And we can see that agreement being privileged, for example, in the SAT, the GRE, the LSAT. It's all about the mind. And that kind of view prizes and rewards outer knowing at the expense of inner knowing. Inner knowing referring to deep wisdom, having a sense of wonder, a sense of the sacred, working with intuition and emotions. And we do this even though we have evidence now, research evidence from some very prominent scholars, that there are more than one or two intelligences. I give you the work of Howard Gardner, who many of you I'm sure have heard of, with his theory of multiple intelligences. He says there are at least 7 diverse ways of knowing, but we usually privilege the first 2, linguistic and logical mathematical. And yet he says that college achievement and success in life depend on all of those 7 intelligences. I also give you the work of Daniel Goleman, who is credited with identifying emotional intelligence, or EQ, as opposed to IQ. And Goleman believes that EQ is more important than IQ for job performance. And you see there the 5 elements of emotional intelligence, from self-awareness, motivation, self-regulation, empathy, to adeptness in relationships. So we need to reframe the agreement that educational achievement and success in life is only about the mind. So what would be an example of a new agreement? And I give you an example there, the agreement to work with diverse ways of knowing in the classroom. Because you see, it's not just about the mind. We need to, as faculty, embrace diverse ways of knowing in the classroom. To know that academic content is very important. I do want my students to know theory and to be able to read and to write and do problem solving and critical thinking. But I think personal experience and other ways of knowing also count. Other ways of knowledge, such as knowledge contributed by women, people of color, indigenous and non-Western scholars. And we need to also be concerned with helping our students to develop a sense of purpose in life, becoming social activists, and becoming caring, compassionate humanitarians. So having said all of that, then you say, well, how do we do this? You know, how do we transform our classrooms? How do we engage in contemplative experience in the classroom? How do we help students to attend to both their intellectual capacities and their inner lives? And so that was my FedServ Fellowship inquiry, my own assignment to answer that question. And so to answer the question, I went to faculty to interview them, those who were doing this kind of work, often under the radar screen, because some of them were concerned that if they said anything about this to their colleagues, that you know, they might be criticized as not being academic enough or touchy-feely or what have you. But they, you know, had been doing this work, many of them for a long time. They were faculty of the mind and the heart, very courageous. They broke away from traditional belief systems. In the process, they created a new pedagogical vision, and they used different forms of contemplative practice in and out of the classroom. I'm going to give you some examples of those faculty. So here you see the list of faculty that I interviewed. You see that they're from different disciplines in 2- and 4-year institutions, men and women, and I sought to have a diverse sample. And I used heuristic and transpersonal research methods. And when possible, I tried to interview some of their students so that I would find out what was the impact of this pedagogy on students. And so to arrange my findings, I basically talk about 2 key ways that faculty were employing what I call an integrative consonant pedagogy. One that was harmonic. It played between inner and outer learning. One that employed diverse forms of contemplative practice to engage students more deeply in material. So position 1 is basically a faculty member that connects inner and outer learning and employs contemplative practice in the classroom. And so then the question is, well, what do we mean by contemplative practices? And the Center for Contemplative Mind and Society, where I'm now pleased to say I'm a member of the board, basically has this definition that contemplative practices quiet the mind in order to cultivate a personal capacity for deep concentration and insight. And there you see a number of examples of contemplative practices. That's not a full list. I'm sure some of you can add to this list. But as you can see, there's different ways to use you know, contemplative forms of engagement in the classroom. So let's get to some examples now. I want to introduce 2 videos, and one of the things that I did when I did my study is I interviewed the faculty. And one of them is my dear friend and colleague, Professor Norma Cantu. She wrote a book called Canicula. Canicula refers to the dog days of summer in South Texas. Both Norma and I are from Laredo, Texas. And one of the things that she does in her book, Canicula, is she takes photographs of her childhood, and she uses those photographs to tell a story. It's an autobiography of her life growing up in South Texas. And so she takes this use of photographs to create a guided imagery exercise, so that in her English classes here at UTSA, students select photographs and they write a story from that photograph. The second video that you will see is Professor Alberto Pulido, and he's got a great activity that I have been using now for several years, and Vijay has helped me with this. It's the Cajitas project. Cajitas being, in this case, we can call them artistic canvases or boxes that students construct. And you know, they're used to help students to reflect on their lives, culture, and identity.
Dr. Rendón and I have used Cajitas project in our own classes. It was first introduced to me by Dr. Rendón, of course, when I took a doctoral seminar with her, that where we used her new book as a textbook for the class. And one of the exercises, and it was tough to go beyond the usual, write a paper that's 20 pages long in the doctoral program. And it was tough for this class because the assignment was to create a cajita. It was, what was the vision of education for us as doctoral students that were graduating with a PhD in education? We were going to be student-based professionals. Some of us were going to be faculty. And so the assignment challenged us to think beyond writing a 20-page essay. And we show you pictures of some of our cajitas, and this is mine. And just to give you a brief history of how I came about doing it, within a span of 5 weeks, it was a 5-week class, and we had to think outside the box, so to speak. And I was struggling with it because, in some ways I lost touch with being an artist that was inside of me. And this was spring term in Iowa. You can think about the frigid cold temperatures that we were experiencing, and I don't know, my mom and I lived together, and my mom decided to clean the garage, and the suitcase was in the corner of the garage, and I decided to throw it away because it was one of the old suitcases that's been with us for a long time. And but that was when I realized a deep story about what had happened with the suitcase. That was the first suitcase that our family had used to come to the United States when we immigrated from India. And so I had to literally dumpster dive and pick up the suitcase because my mom wanted it back because it had a strong historical significance to our family. But that incident made me think back about, how did I forget that? How did I not realize that? What was the impact of immigration on myself, and how do I engage with it? And so I decided to use the suitcase as my cajita. And as you can see, there are a lot of artifacts that represent me and my life story. The $20 bill that you may see over there is the first salary that my mom received working as a daycare provider, but she gifted that to me, so I kept it. But little things like that make you think about the impact of your life on education and the impact of education on your life. The next slide is again another Cajitas project, Cajita of a friend who also happened to take a class, YANIRA, and this is very powerful because behind the flag, YANIRA is Puerto Rican, and what you don't see is a picture of her brother who had passed away. And in creating the cajita, it was the first time that she acknowledged the death of her brother in the classroom, and it was, in some ways, we were allowing her the space to do that, and it was very touching and moving for us to go through that. Here are some other examples of cajitas that we've had in our classes. This is from another student, Danny, in a counseling class. So in some ways, you can see how we've used the Cajitas project and adapted it for different classes. We've got different classes, one on leadership, one on contemplative education, one on counseling, one on student affairs. So we've adapted the Kaitas project to each and every class, and it's been very powerful using it. It's another student, Michelle, who is from Iowa, and so I wanted to give a shout out for all the Iowa State folks. This is Dr. Rendón's.
Yeah, this is my cajita, and actually, it's important to note that what we do, the assignment of doing the cajita is not just for the students, it's for ourselves. So on the last day of class, we have what's called a cajita gallery walk, and the students place the cajitas all around the classroom, and there's a 15-minute silent gallery walk as all of the cajitas get viewed, and we bring our cajitas as well. So position 2 then, basically this is a professor that does the same things in position 1, connecting inner learning and outer learning and using contemplative practice. But this is now a professor that is also very socially conscious. This is someone who is concerned with social change and activism and freeing students and society from oppression, and is concerned with healing and using awareness for social good. So let me give you an example of that kind of an individual. Not that the others didn't care, but these individuals gave me much more focused examples of what they did. This is Carlos Silvera. He teaches art at Cal State Long Beach. When I talked to Carlos, he told me that he very much followed the philosophy of Paulo Freire, and many of you know his work, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which is actually about liberating the oppressed. And so he's very involved in community service learning, placing his students in art projects in the community, and he himself models what he preaches. He traveled to Brazil, he is Brazilian, and worked in the favelas, favelas being the shanty towns that are very dangerous to basically go to because of the drug lords and high levels of crime, young kids having guns very early on. And many people would say these kids can't learn, but Carlos would beg to differ. He went out there and engaged in art projects with the kids and talked about their communities and for at least for the time that he was there, engaged in helping these students in their own healing. So what are some of the agreements that Carlos broke? He broke the agreement that really art is all about, putting a beautiful thing together but then hanging it on a wall with no connection to healing or multiculturalism or any of that. He broke the agreement that real learning is only in the classroom. He broke the agreement that emotions are not important. And he broke the agreement that poor students cannot learn. So what he did then, in my view, was create a new pedagogical dream field with new agreements, a new belief system. And these include that art can transform. It has healing power. It can be used to create sociopolitical awareness. That real learning, it can occur also in a community, because this is where theory meets humanitarianism, compassion, and critical consciousness. That a professor can be a social activist, and that poor students can learn. Let me give you one more example. This is Professor J. Herman Blake, who's now retired from Iowa State University, taught African American Studies. Carnegie Foundation Teacher of the Year. By the way, just about all of these faculty members were award-winning instructors. And he basically is someone who really believes in blending academic rigor with reflection. Very, very big on setting high standards, especially for students of color who are sometimes viewed as not being as smart as others. So what are the agreements that Professor Blake broke? He broke the agreement that the professor is the only expert, that reflection is not necessary, that learning ends once the class is over, that we shouldn't talk about issues of race in the classroom, and that there are limits to learning. His new pedagogical dream field has new agreements One of them being that contemplative practice is critical. That's what allows students to engage more deeply with the material. That issues of race create tension, but we have to work through them. And that expectations should remain high, especially for students of color. So a professor then who embraces a sensing thinking pedagogy has these elements. One of them is that I think it's important that if we want to do this, that we have a contemplative practice of our own, that we are modeling what we preach, that we are reflective scholar practitioners. One, of course, who employs contemplative pedagogy well, carefully thought out, that we make efforts to employ a holistic multicultural approach to teaching and learning, that we employ an inclusive curriculum, caring and deeply invested in students, that we promote self-reflexivity, and that we adopt a transdisciplinary model, that we look at knowledge and learning being between, across, and beyond disciplines. That we set up a validating relationship-centered classroom, and that we help students to awaken their social consciousness and personal empowerment. So what do we call this pedagogy? I struggled with that. First I thought maybe I don't need to call it anything, because I would ask faculty, what is it that you call what you do? And they really didn't have a name for it. So I was sitting in my office when a student from UCLA came and said, I think you need to read this book by Eduardo Galeano called The Book of Embraces. And there was this passage called The Celebration of the Marriage of Heart and Mind. Why does one write if not to put one's pieces together? From the moment we enter school or church, education chops us into pieces. It teaches us to divorce soul from body and mind from heart. The fishermen of the Colombian coast must be learned doctors of ethics and morality, for they invented the word Sentipensante. Sentipensante. Feeling, thinking, to define language that speaks the truth. And so there was my word, Sentipensante. And this is a pedagogy, a vision of education that connects and puts into balance the sentir, or the feeling, the sensing of intuition, introspection, and the inner life, and the pensar of intellectual development and the outer life of action and service. In my book, I talk about this beautiful grammatical tool called DIFRASISMO, which is a dialectical space where two concepts that are obviously opposite, when we look at them to see how they differ and how they complement each other, that they illuminate a larger reality. For example, sky is very different from earth, but when you connect the two, you have world. You and me are very different. If we connect the two, there's a sense of belonging. The Aztecs had this DIFRASISMO, inchochito, inquicato, or flowers and songs, very different, but for them, flowers and songs were about beauty. And so I took this notion of indigenous knowledge, this knowledge tool of DIFRASISMO, to create a view of Sentipensante pedagogy. And in the next slide, I'm showing here 3 different ways of looking at the relationship between content and contemplation. In the dualistic stance, they're separate. There's no connection. You don't connect content to contemplation. In the integrative stance, you connect the two. And in the third one, which I call the integrated illuminative stance, you connect the two. But as you connect content with contemplation, you can generate wisdom and knowledge. And so Sentipensante pedagogy is a series of DIFRASISMOs, two seemingly opposite concepts that when they're investigated and analyzed to see how they relate and connect to each other, illuminate a larger reality. And so we'd like to end by answering any questions, and I think you can type those in now, but also to help us think about the future and what we want to do with this work. I know some of you may be at the beginning stages of this work and wanting to know more. Others are much more advanced.
And therefore we would like to welcome you to think about how are you going to engage with a pedagogy like this, and also think about contemplative education in a broader sense. And so we welcome you to think about your own personal commitments in whatever profession you might be in, and see what that means to you.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so we're totally open for any questions from viewers or participants.
Well, one of the questions was, how can you practice Sentipensante when you're a tenure-track professor, the only other professor in your college? I am not on the tenure-track process, but I'm sure it's going to be tough. But it's also, I think, in some ways, as a young scholar myself, it is a challenge that you need to take on. If you believe in this, and the way I look at it is not only for the student, but also for yourself, that, what is it that you truly believe in? What is it that you want your students to understand? And I struggle with it myself because I'm teaching a research methods class that is taught in a very traditional way, and I'm thinking about how do I change it? How do I go against the grain of how it's been taught traditionally? And so I don't know if I can answer the tenure track process, but I want you to think about how do you embrace it, in a way that you think about the student and also think about yourself.
Yeah, one of the things that I learned when I interviewed faculty is that some of them have been doing it when they were on the tenure track. They just didn't tell anybody, and so essentially they handled this in different ways. For example, one of them talked to me about how he connected to a very strong mentor, and if you said anything about him, you were also saying it about his mentor, and nobody dared say anything. And others just didn't say anything. They just did their work under the radar screen. Another faculty member became president of the faculty senate, and she got involved with the politics of her institution, and so therefore she was very well known, and she just did whatever she felt that she needed to do. And others work really hard on their research, and this is really one of the things that I do. I mean, I think one of the ways I'm known is for my work on access and retention and graduation of low-income students, and so people know me for that work and for my research in that area, and so now they know me for this other work. And I see the two as connected. I don't see them as necessarily disconnected. But I have to say that I take my hat off to people who have been doing this work much longer than I have, and probably better than I have done it. Yeah, I mean, it can be, that's not to say it's not a risky undertaking, but you have to find ways of how you're going to do this. And I think at some point, I think key here is who you are and what you bring are very, very important. And so I think we need to practice that authenticity. Go ahead, Vijay.
There was another question about what have students said about the effects of Sentipensante pedagogy. I think that's a great question because we have to be mindful about that the Sentipensante is not for everybody. But at the same time, we've had students that have, most of our students have embraced it. It's given them a chance to reflect about their lives, about what their calling is, and if they've had struggles that they've not acknowledged. So I think in some ways, this is a breather in their lives to think beyond what has been traditional.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. So we probably have time for one more question. I do see that there are many wonderful questions, and we will be able to generate a report of these questions. So if there are others that you can address after the webinar, there will be an opportunity to do that. But one more for right now.
But let me also say, I know that people are asking about the PowerPoints, and I know that those will be available. But I will also say that those of you, I mean, I obviously just covered the tip of the iceberg here, and a lot of this information is in my book, and my publisher wanted to let you know that if you're interested in getting a nice discount on the book, just go ahead and send me or send Beth or Carrie an email, and we can do that for you. Let's see. In terms of which question do I pick here? There's so many. Somebody talking here about balance in life. There are other ways of knowing. All in balance. Thank you. The ethnic breakdown in my sample is listed there on the chart. It may have gone too fast for you to view. The studies and scholarship on self-reflection. I think there's a number of people that have been writing on this. Center for Contemplative Mind and Society has a very, very good website that you can go to for more information. It's been brought to my attention that Congressman Tim Ryan is coming out with a new book, I think this week or next week. It's called The Mindful Nation, and it's supposed to make quite a splash in education. Because he's writing about the importance of mindfulness and how we need to work with students, and this is more in the K-12, but it applies to higher ed as well, higher ed students. But how do we, reduce stress and anxiety, help students to get along with each other, not engage in bullying and those kinds of negative activities. So those are some of the things that come to mind. Are we almost done here, Beth?
Yeah, we are, and I do see that there are some really interesting questions. So I will, we'll generate a report of these questions and try to perhaps post something with the webinar when it goes up that where you and Vijay have a chance to take these seriously. When there's a little bit more time. But you're right, we have come to the end of our hour, and I just want to thank you so much for presenting this for our network, and thanks to everyone who attended. So point you in the direction of our next webinar, which will be in March, on March 21st, and it's with Catherine Kerr, Dr. Catherine Kerr, who has just recently been appointed to the Warren Alpert School of Medicine at Brown University and also teaching in the Brown Contemplative Studies Initiative there. It's called The Neuroscience of Somatic Attention, a Key to Unlocking Foundational Contemplative Practice for Educators. So we hope to reconnect with you all next month at our next webinar. Registration's up on the website now, and we'll send out an email announcement with more information. I hope you can join us. And for now, farewell until we meet again. Bye, Vijay. Bye, Laura.
Bye-bye.
So
Take
much.
care. Bye-bye.
Sure.